Hello, I'm Xenko. You're watching Game Dev Made Easy, and in the video today, we're going to take a look at the Xenko engine. This will be done in two parts. The first one being me talking about my thoughts on the engine based on the documentation, install process, and basic editor presentation. Then, I will be giving my real-time thoughts on the engine as I play around with it for the first time. Before we begin, I have an AMA channel in my Discord server where people can ask me questions and I will answer the new questions in each subsequent video. Glenn asks, when did you learn your first programming language and what language was that? My first programming language was Visual Basic 6. I learned it when I was in ITT Technical Institute studying computer systems networking. The year was 2008? Magis asks a few questions. Does your chewing gum lose its flavor on a bedpost overnight? I don't know. If your mother says don't chew it, do you swallow it in spite? Don't remember what I did. Can you catch it on your tonsils and heave it left and right? I have no idea what you're talking about. Why do you keep trying to explore new languages and technologies instead of focusing and becoming a pro in a single one? Because learning new things is fun, and being able to teach people various things is always a good thing to me. Not to mention that if I focus on a single thing for a long time, it tends to get boring as it gets harder and harder to find something new to learn with that one bit of technology. What made you decide to do videos showing people how to migrate from Unity to CryEngine? It was inspired by Crytek's website where they showcase CryEngine for Unity developers. How did you get so good at programming? Lots of practice and constantly bugging my mentor, Magius, about the whys instead of the hows on different programming tasks. What made you start your own YouTube channel? There were many tutorials out there, but not the ones I wanted to look at. So I made mine to feature the kinds of tutorials I would have liked to see. How many programmers does it take to change a light bulb? None. That's a hardware issue. Funny joke. Ha, ha, ha. If you could own your dream computer, what would it be? It changes as new technology comes out, but my current build, minus the new NVIDIA RTX series that has been announced, a 20TB hard drive, and 64 gigs of RAM. What do you feel are the minimum specs for a developer's workstation? A potato. In all seriousness though, as long as the workstation can run Visual Studio or any equivalent IDE, you are good to go. So, i3 with 8 gigs of RAM, 250 gigs of hard drive space or more, and an onboard Intel APU/GPU should do the trick. But, I would say to go beyond that to be a bit more productive with a smoother experience and have 16 gigs of RAM, NVIDIA GeForce 960 or equivalent, 240 gig solid state hard drive, 1TB hard drive, Intel Core i5 or Ryzen 5 CPU, to add game development as well as to have decent compile times, decent storage space, faster load times for the OS and applications, and the ability to dual monitor with the good screen resolution. Coburn asked, if you had a blank check, what would you spend it on? Good question. Well, I would probably buy a house and car in China, a house and car in the USA, a top-of-the-line badass rig for both houses, a 7-string guitar, a 6-string bass, a badass amp to go with both of those, a soundboard and mixer combo, a MIDI drum and piano, a very nice and expensive engagement ring for my girlfriend, hi honey, and last but certainly not least, I would buy baby diapers, food, and clothes to last until the future baby was at least 3 years old. Glenn also asked, if you were given a free valid pass that would allow you to kill whomever you wanted in whatever way you wished, how screwed is the originator of JavaScript? Well, I think Futurama said it best with,
Computer sentences them to death! By Snoo Snoo!
Yeah!
With that first set of AMA questions answered, let's get on with the show. Many people say that Xenko is poised to surpass Unity in popularity and usability. However, my immediate thoughts on this statement is that every tool has their own pros and cons associated with them, and hold steadfast in my belief that no tool is inherently better than another. Let's take a look at what the Xenko documentation and website says about it. Xenko is a 2D and 3D game engine, and as of 3.0 is completely free and open source under the MIT license. It was originally designed by Silicon Studio, whom of which no longer support the engine. It has full C#7 support, many built-in game templates, a full asset creation toolchain, a flexible and customizable rendering pipeline, is able to produce photorealistic rendering, is fully multi-threaded, supports next-gen graphics API, and is VR ready. Right up front, color me impressed and excited about giving this engine a look. Xenko is able to build for Windows, Android, iOS, Xbox One, and Universal Windows platform with support for the most popular VR headsets and experimental support for Linux. This is a rather decent amount of supported platforms to build for. System requirements for running Xenko is 5 gigs of hard drive space, Windows 7, 8, 8.1, and 10, Visual Studio 2015 or 2017, a 64-bit CPU, Direct3D 10 compatible or greater GPU, and suggests 8 gigs of RAM. To build for Android, you need to use Xamarin, and to build for iOS, you need Xamarin and a Mac computer. In order to run games made on Xenko, you will need .NET 4.6.1 or greater, DirectX 11, OpenGL or Vulkan, and Visual C++ 2015 runtimes for x86 or 32-bit and or x64 or 64-bit CPUs. The space requirements is very low and honestly is almost the same as with CryEngine. At the same time, it requires less space than Unreal Engine, Lumberyard, and Unity. It follows the suggested amount of RAM for every other game engine on the market that handles 3D rendering. When it comes to building for Android and iOS, the requirement that you need Xamarin is a bit of a letdown, but understandable. The requirements to run games made with Xenko is rather low and diverse, so it should be able to make multi-platform support much easier to deal with. The main downside I can see at this point is that there is no tab or listing for tutorials, but we still haven't installed the engine and looked at the templates. So far, my first impressions on Xenko is that it sounds okay. Moving on, let's take a quick look at the API. The page is definitely very clean and well organized. There is a page for scripting, so we will take a look at that next. Let's look at the Xenko input, as this is relevant to the tutorial we will be doing later. So, it looks like they implemented an input manager class that brings convenience functions for the most commonly used input devices, but at the same time allows for you to use the pure input events themselves. This means that they aren't shoehorning you into a corner for only working with the solutions they provide for you. That's always good to know. Moving on, let's look at the scripting page. It immediately distinguishes between a script and pure C# code and makes sure to point out that only scripts can be attached to entities. This obviously makes perfect sense to anyone that has worked with other game engines. For beginners, not so much. Let's look at the different types of scripts that are available. We have startup scripts, synchronous scripts, and asynchronous scripts. Not only do they explain the difference in these script types, but also give basic code setup examples, which is a nice touch for those getting started. Looking on at the Create a Script section, it shows that you can create the different types of scripts in the Game Studio and in Visual Studio. Pretty nice that they allow for creating scripts in Visual Studio without needing to go into the Game Studio. They lastly reveal that the engine supports hot reloading. This is a very nice and underappreciated feature. Creating public properties that are visible in the editor is up next, and it looks to be very easy, as all you have to do is declare that variable to be public with the getter and setter. Very similar to Unity and CryEngine to a degree. They require an attribute to hide properties in fields, which is also very similar to Unity. Next, events should have a closer look. They set up events to work one way to broadcast from a broadcaster to a receiver. They give the location of where these events stem from and give code examples of creating a broadcast and receiver event. The code section is kind of like a mix between Unity and CryEngine in terms of how the code should work. The documentation is written rather well and is explained succinctly. The way the code is written is a little more involved than Unity, but at the same time it's a little more intuitive than CryEngine from a beginner standpoint. This has increased my initial thoughts on the engine a bit. Now let's take a look at installation and the editor.
Surprise, motherfucker!
Installing the launcher is a breeze, and the file size is small, which is always nice. However, installing the engine takes forever as the file size is around 5.5 gigs total. Keep in mind that I'm in mainland China, so I am nowhere near the main servers, so take my installation times with a grain of salt. However, the installation failed about 6 different times for me with the timeout error, which made me have to spend an entire day installing the engine. That is completely unacceptable in my eyes. This lowers my initial thoughts back to what it was prior to viewing the documentation in the API. Once I got the engine to finally install successfully, I clicked to start the engine. I was immediately greeted with a multitude of different templates: FPS, top-down RPG, VR, and others. This was a pleasant surprise as they give you a starting point for many different game types to base your code off of, in addition to giving some code examples on how to handle different problems. They also have a getting started section that they link you to, which gives you further information, which is also very nice, and leads to a seamless experience for beginners starting game development. Minus that hiccup with installation, my overall current impressions are positive. Let's do the last portion, which is looking at the basic editor. To do this, we need to create a blank project or select one of the template types. I'm going to go with the blank project as I will use this to build our code example later. It will allow you to name the project after selecting which one you want to use. Give the location, solution name, and solution location. I will just change the location to be a specific folder that I created for Xenko projects and name the project to be blank project. Now it will ask what platforms, asset packs, rendering, and orientation you want to use. I'm going to go with Windows only with no asset packs, Direct3D 11/OpenGL ES 3.1 with high dynamic range HDR, and the orientation will be landscape right. This initial setup is fairly clean and leaves me with a positive view of this engine so far. But let's continue on and click OK. A creating session window will pop up to tell you the status. I like this, but I don't at the same time. It doesn't give a clean view to me and just adds another window to be viewable on the screen when there's no issues. I feel that the window should only pop up if there's an issue or is taking longer than normal to generate. The editor will now open, and upon my immediate view of the editor screen, I like the overall aesthetic of it, but at the same time, the asset view is defaulted to be a bit too big for my liking. The Solution Explorer gives me the impression that I can interact with my code directly from this, so I'm going to test that idea really quickly. I'm going to click on the Add Asset button, as I assume that is how you can add code. And what do you know? My assumptions rang true. Let's highlight Script and select Sync Script. It pulls up a very boring and bland window with the way you can name a class and what the namespace should be. I'm going to call it Test Script and leave the namespace alone. An info box will pull up that says that the scripts need to be saved to use. After that, you select Save. It will say that the game code files have been modified and ask if you want to reload the assemblies. Of course we want to save and reload. Why wouldn't we? This does not leave a good impression for me, as this should only happen once or be in the tips page at the start versus a reoccurring thing unless you select not to ask again. Alright. Now I'm going to assume that we need to look in the Solution Explorer to find our code, and it looks to be in blankproject.game. Alright, now I'm going to double click on the test script and see if it opens up in Visual Studio. Well, that's different. It opens up inside the editor instead of Visual Studio. That's pretty cool. Let's see if it has syntax highlighting. Indeed it does. And let's just write some code and... Oh, come on! Alright, so final delineations on my thoughts so far. Overall, the engine looks decent and is rather easy to assume where things are and find. Let's go to the impressions meter and put a number on this. My overall first impressions for Xenko Engine is a solid 6 out of 10. Very decent and pleasant to look at, but has some issues that will need to be rectified in future versions. But I think this will be a tool that should be looked at and followed into the future, as it looks to have solid foundations for becoming one of the main engines that people could use for game development. I want to give a warm thank you to all my current Patreon supporters and all of you viewers that like to watch my content. In the next Xenko video, we will be building a basic movement script tutorial. Well, if you stayed this far, it is only right that I present you with yet another free game giveaway. The key will be for the game you saw on the screen, Tales of Berseria. Now, I honestly love this game series and have enjoyed this game since I purchased it on release day of January 2017. The rules are simple. Like or dislike this video, comment why you liked or disliked, and come into the Discord server with a comment that says what your YouTube name is to be entered in a drawing. I will announce the randomly selected winner in the next video.